They thought it was over for her. But then, a dog from the past stepped in and everything changed. This is a true story of the heart, here on Veil Marks. Welcome to Veil Marks, where stories are not just told, they're felt. Today's story is one you won't forget. It begins with a little girl whose heart was failing, and a retired K9 who heard what no one else could. Sometimes, as Fred Rogers once said, anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. This is a story of pain, of promise, and of a bond so deep, it reached beyond medicine into something eternal. Watch until the final scene, not just for the tears or the twists, but because somewhere in it lives a truth we all need to hear. If this story touches you, please comment, subscribe, and share Veil Marks. Your support helps me bring more light into this world. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Outside the third-floor windows of St. Jude's Care, the sky wept in a gray silence that mirrored the mood inside room 318. The light filtering through the glass was soft, filtered, like it was trying to spare the girl in the hospital bed from the full weight of the truth. 10-year-old Emily Grace lay still, wrapped in a fleece blanket with small pine trees stitched across the edge of her favorite, one she'd had since she was 5. Her eyes, hazel with flecks of amber, once so bright and full of questions, now blinked slow and heavy, as if each movement took more energy than she had to give. Her breaths came in shallow waves, sometimes skipping entirely for a beat or two, as the machines nearby hummed and blinked like a quiet audience watching someone hang in the balance. Doctors had stopped making promises weeks ago. Her condition, pediatric end-stage heart failure, was rare, aggressive, and unforgiving. They'd tried everything modern medicine had to offer. Now, they were managing pain. Time, the word they all carefully avoided, had become a quiet specter in the room. "She's comfortable," said Dr. Bennett one morning, looking at the charts without really looking at Emily. No more interventions. At this point, her quality of life matters most. Carolyn Grace, Emily's mother, nodded politely without letting go of her daughter's hand. She wore her brown hair in a loose bun, eyes always tired but never unfocused. Beneath her nurse's scrubs and calm tone was a woman carrying 2 decades worth of endurance. She had worked night shifts in hospitals for most of her adult life. But nothing had prepared her for this kind of helplessness. "She hears everything," Carolyn said softly after the doctor left, "even when she pretends to sleep." Carolyn had fought for one more option. Not a cure, but a balm, a moment of peace, a thread of light. When she learned about the K9 Light program, a pilot partnership between St. Jude's and a nonprofit that placed therapy dogs with terminal pediatric patients, she requested it immediately. Not everyone on staff supported it. "She needs monitoring," Dr. Bennett had objected. "Bringing in a retired K9 might comfort her, but it won't buy her time." "No," Carolyn had answered, "but maybe it'll remind her what time is still left." The dog arrived on a Wednesday. His name was Bruno. He was a large, sable-coated German shepherd, older than most working dogs, with silver around his muzzle and a slow, deliberate gait. His left ear had a slight bend, evidence of an injury from long ago. He had been trained for search and rescue, served during 3 wildfires, and retired after a severe back leg injury. His file said, "Calm temperament, high empathy." His eyes said something deeper. He entered the pediatric ward with quiet authority, guided by his handler, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s named Celia. Children peeked from doorways. Nurses whispered, "Doctor." Bennett frowned from behind his clipboard. When they reached room 318, Bruno stopped. He didn't need instruction. He simply looked up at Celia, then pushed the door open with his nose. Emily didn't sit up when he walked in. She didn't have the strength. But her eyes widened. Slowly, carefully, Bruno padded toward her bed. Carolyn rose, unsure of what to expect. Celia remained by the door, watching like someone who'd seen something extraordinary happen before and was waiting to see it again. Bruno reached the bed and sat. He looked at Emily, his head tilted just slightly. Then, in one motion, he laid down and rested his head gently on her chest, right over her heart. Carolyn gasped. So did the nurse who had followed them in with the chart. The monitor next to the bed let out a soft, steady tone. Emily's heart rate, which had been flickering irregularly for days, settled. For the first time in hours, the beats were even, the rhythm stronger, not cured, but present, stable, real. No one spoke for a moment. Then Emily, with a whisper that barely rose above the machine's hum, said, "He knows." Carolyn leaned closer. "What, baby?" "He hears what I can't say out loud." Celia took a small step into the room, blinking slowly. "Sometimes they just find their person," she said. Dr. Bennett was called back in. He stood at the doorway, arms crossed, reading the monitor like it owed him an explanation. He didn't say anything, just noted it on the chart, nodded once, and left. But the look on his face wasn't skepticism. It was something closer to disbelief. Carolyn sat back down beside her daughter, tears pooling at the corners of her eyes but refusing to fall. She looked at Bruno, still resting his head on Emily's chest like he'd found his post and intended to stay there. "You're welcome here," she whispered. Emily's fingers twitched and moved slowly toward Bruno's fur. She stroked him gently, the way a child touches something precious, afraid it might vanish. Bruno didn't move. His eyes were half closed, his breath slow and deep, but his ear flicked once, as if to say, "I'm here." Later that night, after the nurses dimmed the lights and the machines continued their soft chorus of sound, Carolyn watched Emily sleep for the first time in days without grimaces of pain. Bruno didn't leave, not even when Celia came to collect him. He stayed until Emily stirred awake again just past midnight. And when she did, the first word out of her mouth wasn't, "Mommy." It was, "Bruno." In the silence that followed, Carolyn placed her hand on her daughter's forehead. A soft, quiet smile formed on her lips. For the first time in a long time, the room didn't feel like a goodbye. Not yet. Not tonight. The days following Bruno's arrival passed in a gentle rhythm, quieter, steadier, almost sacred. Emily's episodes of chest pain didn't vanish, but she smiled more. Her breathing, though shallow, was less strained when Bruno lay near her. Nurses began scheduling his visits around her most difficult hours. Some even noticed that her medication doses were holding longer than before. And Bruno, despite his aging joints and slow walk, never failed to arrive and settle right beside her, as if born for the role of guardian. Carolyn watched all this unfold with a strange blend of relief and unease. Something about the way Bruno moved around, her daughter felt deeply familiar, like a song she'd heard long ago but couldn't quite place. He wasn't just responding to Emily's needs. He seemed to know the space, the rhythms, even the people. Sometimes he'd glance at her with those intelligent eyes, and for a fleeting second, Carolyn could swear he recognized her. Not from recent weeks. From something older. It was on a Sunday afternoon, late October, when a visitor to the pediatric ward gave shape to that unease. The man was thin, wiry, wearing a dark cap and a coat too big for his shoulders. His eyes were sharp behind his glasses, but his face bore the lines of 8 decades of sun, worry, and work. He moved with purpose and gentleness, like someone who had spent years giving commands, but even more years learning when silence was the better choice. His name was Horace Wilkins, 82 years old, a retired canine handler who volunteered on weekends to visit hospitals with his walker and stories. The nurses adored him. The children did too. That afternoon, he walked slowly into the common area, where Bruno was resting beside Emily's wheelchair. Emily was working on a puzzle, her hands trembling slightly as she fit together pieces with quiet concentration. Bruno lay with his head resting on his paws, ever alert to her movements. Horace didn't speak at first. He just stared. Then his mouth opened, slightly slack, and he whispered something low. "Well, I'll be damned." Carolyn looked up from the corner and blinked. "Excuse me, Sia?" Horace took another step forward, eyes never leaving the German shepherd. "That dog," he said, voice raspy but clear. "That's Bravo 3-7. Emily tilted her head. "Bruno?" The old man chuckled, though his eyes shimmered with memory. "They call him Bruno now, huh? I suppose that suits him. But I know that stance anywhere. Left leg drags just a bit from that collapsed tunnel up in Clearwater. Summer of 13. That blaze nearly took the whole ridge. Carolyn's breath caught. Her throat tightened. Her fingers gripped the armrest of the chair so tightly her knuckles turned pale. "Clear water?" she asked. "Careful. Steady." Horace nodded slowly, as if playing back scenes only he could see. "Your daddy," he said, now looking directly at Emily, "was a firefighter, one of the best. He went in too deep that day, past where we had clearance. Roof came down, took out comms. We thought he was lost." Carolyn sat down slowly, like her legs had given out. Emily's lips parted, eyes wide. "My daddy?" Horace smiled gently, glancing back at Bruno. The dog had risen now, standing beside Emily's chair, not moving toward Horace, but watching him head low, tail still, as if listening to every syllable. "I trained this one myself. Started him in cadaver work, but he had too much heart for that. He needed to find the living. We sent him into the fire that day with one goal. And he dragged your daddy out, through heat so strong it melted part of his vest. Saved his life." Bruno looked up at Carolyn then, as if waiting for permission to go further. Carolyn wiped at her face. "His name was David. Still is," Horace replied softly. "And this boy here, he didn't just save his life, he changed it. Your husband, he stayed behind afterward, said he owed the team something." "No," Carolyn whispered. "He didn't stay. He left." And Emily looked up at her mother in confusion. Carolyn hesitated. Her hand reached down and rested on her daughter's shoulder. "I didn't tell you before," she said gently. "I wanted to protect you. Your dad," he struggled. "After the fire, after everything, PTSD, guilt. He thought he'd only hurt us if he stayed. But he was a hero." Emily's voice was so quiet it almost vanished. Carolyn's eyes welled. "Yes, he was. He is." End of quote. Horace crouched as much as his old knees allowed and extended a hand toward Bruno. The dog stepped forward, sniffed once, and let the man scratch behind his ear. "I trained him for courage, not comfort," Horace said, barely above a whisper. "Looks like he learned both." Bruno licked the old man's hand once before returning to Emily's side, and resting there, protective, loyal. Emily looked down at him and smiled, tears sliding gently across her cheeks. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The dog who saved her father had found his way back to save something more. And though no one in that room could explain how or why, everyone felt it. The threads of time, memory, pain, and grace had somehow woven back together, and in the center of it all stood Bruno, quiet and sure, as if he had known the whole story long before anyone else did. The mornings at St. Jude's began to blur into each other, IVs humming, nurses whispering, the muted beeps of monitors marking time as it slipped quietly forward. But Emily's world didn't tick like the hospital clocks. For her, time pulsed in waves of memory and longing, none more vivid than the one tied to a tree. It was a Douglas fir, tall and quiet, planted behind the old family cabin on the edge of Winmere Forest. Carolyn had dug the first hole herself, 8 months pregnant, while David strummed a guitar nearby, the sound blending with the rustle of pine needles overhead. When Emily was born, they returned as a family of 3 and tied a ribbon to the sapling's trunk. Each year since, they'd marked her birthday with a photo by that tree until the last visit, when everything fell apart. Now, lying in her bed beneath hospital lights, Emily thought of it constantly. The tree, the breeze, the soft chords of her father's guitar. Her breathing grew strained whenever she tried to describe it, but her eyes said enough. Carolyn saw it. One afternoon, as she adjusted Emily's blankets, the girl looked up and asked, "Do you think the tree still remembers me?" Carolyn smiled. "I think trees never forget." That night, after Emily fell asleep, Carolyn stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the pale green exit sign. She wanted to be brave for her daughter, but the idea of losing her without letting her return to that tree, their tree, hollowed her from the inside out. The next morning, while Dr. Bennett made rounds, Carolyn brought it up gently. "She's asking about the fir behind our old place." Dr. Bennett didn't look up from the chart. "Nostalgia is natural, Carolyn, but travel of any kind is too dangerous. She wouldn't be alone. He closed the folder and glanced at her with tired eyes. She can't breathe on her own for more than a few minutes. Her heart's failing, and transporting her that far, even with equipment, there's no medical justification. She's not asking for justification, Carolyn said, her voice strained. She's asking for a final memory. Dr. Bennett hesitated, then shook his head. I'm sorry. Carolyn returned to Emily's room, silent. That evening, she found her daughter tracing a faded photograph with her fingertip on from when Emily was 4, seated beneath the fir tree in a red flannel coat, holding a pine cone. I remember the way the sun looked that day, Emily whispered, like everything was golden. Carolyn knelt beside the bed. That's the light from late September. It's different out there. Do you think I could see it again? Emily asked. Just once more? Carolyn didn't answer. She simply held her daughter's hand, unsure whether to break the truth or build the hope. 2 days later, while Carolyn stood in the hallway reviewing Emily's oxygen settings, a voice spoke softly behind her. I heard about the tree. She turned to see Peter Langstonon of the younger nurses on the pediatric team. He was kind, sharp, and quietly devoted to the children in his care. His eyes were rimmed red, like he hadn't slept well. I know I'm just a nurse, he said, but I've seen the records. Her vitals improve when Bruno's there, and her morale's higher since you started talking about that tree. Carolyn's brow creased. What are you saying? Peter glanced around, lowered his voice. I'm saying I could help. I know someone in discharge. With the right paperwork, it might look like a therapeutic home visit, with hospital-grade equipment. Temporary release. Carolyn's mouth fell open slightly. That's against every policy. She doesn't have time for policy, Peter said. She has a wish. That night, as Bruno lay curled at the foot of Emily's bed, the girl began to cry quietly. Her shoulders trembled, her eyes fixed on the window where the reflection of the fluorescent lights blocked out the sky. I just want to go home one more time, she whispered. Bruno lifted his head. Then, slowly, he stood, padded over to her side, and nudged the wheel of her chair with his nose. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Gentle, like a message only she could understand. Emily stopped crying. She looked down at him and smiled through her tears. You want to go too? Bruno rested his head on her lap. And for the first time in days, she laughed a short, hoarse sound, but laughter all the same. Carolyn watched them from the doorway. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone and sent a text. Let's do it. Tomorrow. The next morning, before the shift changed, Peter arrived with a rolling oxygen unit, discharge forms, and a quiet nod. Celia, Bruno's handler, had agreed to accompany them with Bruno. She said nothing, only fastened the dog's vest, adjusted her grip on the leash, and stood by the elevator. As they wheeled Emily down the hallway, a few nurses turned to watch. None stopped them. Carolyn thought she saw one wipe away a tear. When they reached the front lobby, Dr. Bennett stood by the doors, arms crossed. This is highly irregular, he said. I know, Carolyn replied. He looked at Emily and the Charriers, alert, skin pale but bright. Then at Bruno, sitting tall, alert. Then back to Carolyn. If this is her last wish, she said, let it be under the same tree she came into the world for. Dr. Bennett didn't respond. But after a long pause, he stepped aside and let them pass. Outside, the air was crisp and cool. Emily tilted her head to feel the sun. Carolyn wheeled her slowly down the ramp, Bruno walking beside them with the quiet dignity of someone who'd already made the journey once before. No one spoke on the drive. They didn't need to. The road was familiar. The cabin stood just where they'd left it, and beyond the back porch, behind a clearing overgrown with golden weeds and soft pine needles, the tree stood tall and waiting. They had come home, and beneath its branches, something sacred waited to be remembered. The car rolled to a stop at the edge of the clearing, tires crunching over gravel and fallen pine needles. The cabin stood quiet, weather-worn but intact, nestled in the embrace of Windmere Forest like it had always been waiting for them to return. Emily stirred in her seat, eyes barely open, her breath fogging up the inside of the window. Carolyn leaned over and whispered, We're here, sweetheart. The girl's lips parted, a small breath escaping. Is the tree still there? Carolyn nodded. Right where we left it. Peter carefully unlocked the back of the van while Celia adjusted Bruno's harness. The dog had been sitting motionless the entire drive. His eyes fixed ahead like he understood every mile, brought them closer to something sacred. As the ramp lowered, Bruno stepped out first, scanning the surroundings with his usual quiet vigilance. The air was cool but not biting, rich with the scent of pine and damp soil. Autumn's golden glow painted everything in honeyed light. Carolyn wrapped a soft shawl around Emily's frail shoulders, adjusted the oxygen mask gently over her face, and with Peter's help, began to wheel her daughter toward the backyard. The tree stood just past the fence, taller now, branches wide and sweeping like arms welcoming home. A child grown too soon. Its trunk had thickened since Emily last saw it, but the faint ribbon, now faded and fraying, still fluttered from a low branch. Emily gasped a sound both joyful and aching. It's bigger. Carolyn's voice trembled. So are you. They wheeled her close enough for her to reach out. Her thin fingers brushed the bark. I missed you, she whispered to the tree. Then she looked at Bruno. And you. Bruno sat beside her, tail resting still in the dirt, gaze fixed on her with that unwavering calm that never demanded anything, only offered presence. A silence fell over the grove thick and tender. Then Emily leaned forward and, as if telling a secret too heavy for any human ear, whispered into the dog's ear. If I don't come back, stay with Mom. Bruno didn't move, but something shifted in the air. Carolyn turned her head, blinking away tears. Celia stepped back silently. Peter took a breath, but said nothing. Then Bruno rose, padded forward toward the base of the tree, and began to dig, slow, measured pawing. Not frantic, but purposeful. Carolyn stepped forward. What's he doing? Celia didn't answer. She just watched. After a minute, Bruno stopped. Between the roots, in a shallow, dry patch of earth, something white peeked through the dirt. He leaned down and gently tugged it free with his teeth, then turned and dropped it at Emily's feet. Carolyn knelt beside the chair and picked it up. It was a handkerchief, yellowed with age, edges frayed, but clearly hand-stitched. On the corner, in faded green thread, was the name David. Carolyn's breath caught. Oh my God, she murmured. She knew it instantly. David had always carried this handkerchief. It was his good luck charm. She hadn't seen it since the week he left, when he vanished into himself and disappeared into the smoke and guilt of what the fire had done to his mind. That day, he had stood at this tree, guitar in hand, unable to speak. When she called to him, he'd just nodded once and walked away. Emily's hand trembled as she reached out to touch the cloth. But before her fingers made contact, her body sagged in the wheelchair. Emily? Carolyn panicked. Peter rushed forward. Celia grabbed the oxygen meter. Emily's eyes had closed, her head tilted sideways, lips pale. She's fainting, Peter muttered, pulse dropping. Carolyn caught her daughter before she slumped too far, holding her in her arms, pressing her close. No, baby, stay with me. Please. Bruno climbed into the wheelchair, ignoring the rules, pressing his body close, and began licking Emily's hand, over and over, firm but not frantic, as though calling her back from the edge. Come on, sweetheart, Carolyn cried, brushing back the hair from her daughter's damp forehead. Come back to the tree. Emily's body jerked once, then again. Peter leaned over. She's stabilizing, oxygen's coming back. Carolyn could feel it in her arms, the slow rise and fall of her daughter's chest. Then, a sound she hadn't heard in days. A breath, deeper than before, not effortless, but alive. Emily's lips moved. Carolyn leaned in. What is it, honey? A whisper escaped. Golden pines, silver skies. Carolyn blinked. She knew that tune. It was the lullaby David wrote when Emily was born, one he used to hum while rocking her in the hammock out back. He never finished it. Always said he would add a final verse when he felt whole again. Emily opened her eyes slowly. I heard him, in the breeze. Carolyn froze, trying not to sob. You heard Daddy? He was playing the guitar. under the tree. Carolyn looked up. The branches swayed above them in the late afternoon light, filtering gold through their needles. The wind rustled the leaves in just the right rhythm Carolyn knew by heart. Peter stepped back, visibly moved. Celia wiped her face. Bruno remained where he was, chest against Emily's lap, eyes closed, as if part of him had traveled further than any of them that day. Emily whispered again, this time stronger. He left the handkerchief, so we'd know he didn't forget us. Carolyn held her tighter. They stayed beneath the tree for a long time. No one hurried them. No one measured the moment. The sun dipped toward the horizon, brushing the tips of the pines with fire. The tree, the girl, the mother, the doggle bound by roots, memory, and something deeper than medicine could name. And for that moment, at least, Emily was whole. The wind had changed by the time they returned to St. Jude's. Emily slept through most of the trip. Her small frame was light in Carolyn's arms as Peter and Celia carefully lifted her back into her hospital bed. Her vitals fluttered, still faint, still fragile but stable enough for now. Bruno watched from the hallway, panting softly, head lowered but alert. He hadn't left her side in hours. Until now. The moment they reached the ICU wing, the nurse at the checkpoint raised her hand. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "Therapy animals aren't allowed past this line, not in critical care." Celia stepped forward, leash firm in hand. "He's not just therapy." "I understand," the nurse said, and her voice truly did sound kind. "But I can't make an exception. Orders are orders." Carolyn hesitated. Bruno didn't. He sat down outside the ICU door, facing it squarely, like a soldier on watch. When they wheeled Emily inside, she was already slipping deeper. Her fingers twitched but didn't respond to touch. Her pulse thudded like a question with no answer. The room quieted. Only the machines spoke slow, irregular beeps measuring the breath and beat of a life hanging by threads. Carolyn barely moved from her chair. She held Emily's hand, kissed her temple, whispered stories from better days. But there was no response now. No squeeze back, no flutter of eyelids. And outside, Bruno stayed still. Hours passed. Night crept in. Then something strange happened. From behind the ICU door, the nurse heard a soft tapping. 3 quick knocks. A pause. 1 long knock. Then the sequence again. She frowned. That rhythm. Celia, who had dozed off nearby, snapped awake and stood. Her eyes locked with the door, heart skipping. 3 short, 1 long. Morse code. The old rescue signal. Bruno. The dog was trying to call in. "Ma'am," the nurse whispered. "Is that a code?" Celia stepped to the door, crouched beside it. Yes. He was trained for disaster response. That's his way of saying there's someone who still needs help. Inside the ICU, Carolyn held Emily's hand, unaware of the quiet rebellion just outside. The monitors had begun to slow. The pulse was dipping, not crashing, but dwindling, like a candle near the end of its wick. "I don't know what else to do," Carolyn whispered. "Please, give me a sign." Then Peter appeared, clutching a dusty guitar case. "I found this," he said, breathless, "in the hospital storage room. Looked like someone left it here years ago, tagged under David G." Carolyn's eyes widened. She opened the case. Inside lay David's old 6-string guitar, worn around the edges, but unmistakably his. The wood still carried the warmth of 1,000 nights and 100 lullabies. Her fingers brushed the strings. A memory hit her. Years ago, Bruno had curled at David's feet while he played this very instrument. Emily, barely 6 months old, asleep in her bassinet. The music had woven around them like magic, making even silence feel alive. Carolyn gasped. Bruno used to sleep to this tune. Peter's eyes lit up. "Do you think?" She didn't wait. She called David. It was the first time she'd dialed his number in over a year. He picked up after 1 ring. "Carolyn?" His voice cracked. "She's fading." Silence. Then, "Where?" "St. Jude's Ill Wing." "And David, she needs your song." It took him 20 minutes to arrive. He came in through the staff entrance, carrying nothing but his coat and the tremble in his chest. His beard had grown in scruffy, his eyes hollow from years of absence. But in them flickered something raw and brave. Carolyn handed him the guitar without a word. David sat beside Emily's bed, brushing a hand through her hair. Then he took a deep breath, adjusted the guitar on his knee, and strummed the first familiar chord. "Golden pines, silver skies," he sang, softly, brokenly. Bruno, who had finally been allowed past the ICU threshold under Celia's watch, perked up immediately. He crept toward Emily's side and placed his head gently on the edge of her mattress. Carolyn held her breath. David continued singing. "I once knew a lullaby that lit up your eyes." His fingers trembled as he played, but the notes held true. His voice gained strength verse by verse. The room seemed to lean into the sound. The machine still beat, but slower now, more rhythmic, less erratic. Then, something miraculous. Emily's lips parted. Her eyelids twitched. A faint whisper of breath escaped. "Daddy," Carolyn gasped, leaping to her feet. David stopped playing, tears rushing down his cheeks. "I'm here," he said, voice cracking. "I ran away once, but if you wake up, I swear I'll never run again." Emily's chest lifted. Her fingers moved. Just barely, but enough. Bruno licked her knuckles. The heart monitor picked up a new beat. Steady, gentle, alive. Carolyn reached for her daughter's hand. "Sweetheart, we're all here." Emily didn't speak again, but her eyes opened slightly, just enough to see them all. The man she hadn't seen in years. The dog who never left her side. The mother who carried her through every battle. And above it all, the guitar, the song, the light. No one said a word after that. They just listened. To the music, to the breath returning, to hope rising. And Bruno, faithful, fierce, unmoving, never looked away. The morning sunlight filtered through the half-drawn blinds in room 308. The soft hum of machines still framed the air, but the rhythm had changed, slower, steadier, hopeful. Emily was awake. Not fully, not in the way a child might burst into a room with boundless energy. But she was there, eyes open, breathing on her own for minutes at a time. A faint blush had returned to her cheeks. Her fingers curled when her name was called. And when Carolyn leaned in close and whispered, "Do you remember the tree?" Emily had whispered back, "It grew." Dr. Bennett himself, normally unreadable, had let out a breath of something that almost resembled joy. "She's fragile," he told them, "but recovering. A few days in the rehabilitation room won't hurt if she feels strong enough." "She doesn't need strong," David replied, his voice calm for once. "She just needs a reason." That reason came sooner than anyone expected. That afternoon, Emily asked if she could draw. The request, so simple, startled them all. For days they had begged her to respond, to eat, to smile. Now she was asking for paper. Carolyn pressed her lips to Emily's forehead and said yes before the sentence had finished leaving her daughter's mouth. Peter brought a small table into the therapy room. Celia wheeled in a tray of watercolors and clay. Bruno followed, padding quietly at Emily's side, never straying more than a step away. The moment the brushes were set down, Emily reached forward. Her hand shook. She missed the edge of the page at first, but Carolyn gently guided her wrist, and with a deep breath, Emily pressed the brush to paper. The first shape was a circle, then another, then a line arcing across the page. Colors blended: yellow, green, brown. "What's that?" David asked softly, sitting across from her. Emily looked up, lips pale but smiling. "The tree. Our tree." Carolyn blinked quickly. "The one in Windermere," Emily nodded, "and the sun behind it, like that day." Next came a tall shadow beside the tree, 4 legs, pointed ears, and eyes she colored a warm, honeyed brown. Bruno, watching intently, gave a soft woof as if to say, "Yeah, that's me." The room filled with the quiet music of brushstrokes and breath. The nurses who passed by slowed down, stealing glances through the door. It wasn't just that Emily was painting it, was the way her whole body seemed to lean into the image, like she was pouring out something bigger than memory. After the painting, she asked for the clay. Her fingers were small and weak, but stubborn. She pressed into the soft material with silent determination. At first it was just a shapeless lump. Then she pinched the sides, smoothed the top, pressed her thumb in gently, shaping the curve. When she was finished, she held it up, a small heart, uneven and imperfect, but unmistakable. She turned it around and used a pencil to etch a single letter in its center. A.B. Carolyn swallowed hard. David cleared his throat. Emily held out the heart toward Bruno, and the dog, understanding something deeper than words, stepped forward. He placed his paw on the floor next to it and bowed his head. "He's my heart," Emily whispered. "He always was." David reached for his guitar, which now rested in the corner of the room like a silent witness to everything they'd survived. He tuned the strings slowly, letting the sound fill the silence like sunlight warming cold skin. Then, softly, he began to play. "Golden Pines, Silver Skis." Carolyn's voice, unsure at first, joined his. "Little hands, little eyes." Emily listened, eyes wide, as if the song itself was pulling her back to someplace safe and familiar. Bruno climbed up beside her on the padded therapy bed, resting his head gently on her feet. The music swelled. The light streaming through the windows flickered across the room. Emily's lips parted. She sang faintly, but in tune. This is our song," she said, voice trembling. "You never stopped singing it, did you?" David looked at her, eyes wet, smile trembling. "We never could." Carolyn reached for Emily's hand. Bruno thumped his tail softly against the sheets, the clay heart still resting on the tray beside them. In that moment, surrounded by music, paint, and the faithful weight of a dog's loyalty, the family that had once been broken began to mend. No fanfare, no miracles shouted from rooftops, just a girl with clay on her fingers, a dog with tired eyes, and a song that never forgot how to find its way home. The day Emily was discharged, the halls of St. Jude's glowed a little brighter. It wasn't just the morning sun spilling through the windows. It was the way every nurse who passed her wheelchair slowed down to smile, the way the janitor wiped away a tear when Bruno trotted beside her, tail swaying gently like a metronome for hope. It was the way Carolyn held her daughter's hand like she still couldn't quite believe it was warm again. 3 weeks had passed, since the night they all thought would be her last. 3 weeks of cautious breaths, of music and painting, of Bruno never once leaving her side. Her recovery hadn't been quick, but it had been steady, quiet, and relentless, like roots pushing through stone. It was Dr. Bennett, of all people, who broke the news that turned everything. He stood beside her bed, eyes on his tablet, jaw tight. "We sent in samples," he said slowly, "from Bruno's coat. Routine allergy cross-check." Carolyn's brow furrowed. "And? There's an enzyme in his skin oils," Bennett continued. "One we've only seen in rare wild Caneanesum kind of natural anti-inflammatory. It matches a compound used in experimental treatment for myocarditis. But this variant is purer, cleaner. It bonded with Emily's own markers." David blinked. "You're saying Bruno helped?" "I'm saying," the doctor exhaled, "the contact therapy with him may have done more than calm her nerves. It may have been protecting her heart." He looked at the girl, now painting quietly in the corner, sunlight in her hair, a soft hum under her breath. "I've seen recoveries," he added, "but not like this." The story caught fire within the hospital's walls. Nurses whispered it in break rooms. Peter joked about cloning Bruno. Celia kissed his nose and called him Dr. Dog. But none of that mattered to Emily. All she wanted was to go back to the pines, the same grove where it all began, the tree where her father once played guitar, where she had whispered goodbye, thinking she'd never see the sun again. Now, as spring tiptoed into the forest, it was time for a different kind of moment. Dr. Bennett, now officially converted, signed off on the plan. On a soft April morning, the staff of St. Jude's gathered beneath the canopy of evergreens just beyond the hospital grounds. Not far, but far enough to breathe air that didn't taste of antiseptic and old prayers. Far enough to feel like the world had begun again. Emily wore a pale blue sweater, her fingers still thin, but her grip firm on the string of a handmade wind chime. Bruno walked beside her, his coat brushed until it gleamed. Carolyn and David followed close behind. Someone had brought folding chairs. Someone else, a table of lemonade and cookies. Nurse Peter wore a tie. Celia had picked wildflowers and lined them along the fence. At the center of it all stood Horace 82, back straight, dressed in his old K9 service uniform. His hat rested neatly under one arm. His other hand held a small wooden plaque, etched in gold. He called the group to quiet with a gentle tap of his cane. "In all my years," he said, voice slow but sure, "I've trained over 70 dogs, some brave, some brilliant. But only one ever saved a life, by listening to a heartbeat no one else could hear." He turned toward Bruno. "This medal," Horace continued, lifting the plaque, "is for service beyond protocol, for loyalty without command, for guarding not just a body, but a soul." He bent down and clipped the medal to Bruno's collar, a tiny bronze heart, engraved with the words, "Heart Guardian." Bruno didn't bark or jump. He simply sat, as though he understood the weight of the moment and accepted it. Emily stepped forward next. She walked slowly but without help, the chime still held gently in her hand. She looked up at the pine tree, the same one they'd planted when she was born, and reached for a low-hanging branch. "I made this so you'd always hear me," she said, voice clear and small. "Every time the wind sings, I want you to remember how I laughed." The wind chime swayed. Its notes were soft, high, almost like distant laughter itself. Carolyn wiped her eyes. David pulled her close. Later, when most had left and the pines stood quiet again, Emily sat on the grass with a small leather notebook on her lap. Bruno lay beside her, chin on her foot, watching the leaves. She scribbled slowly, carefully. Then she read aloud, "The Dog That Heard My Soul." It was the title of the essay she would submit for the local youth writing contest. A reporter from the town paper, who had been invited by Celia, took a few notes. Weeks later, an excerpt would be published, and dozens of letters would pour into the hospital asking to meet the girl with the wind chime and the dog with the golden eyes. But in that moment, it was just them. Emily smiled and closed the notebook. She turned to Bruno. "I thought I was too broken to be found," she whispered, her voice like a thread of silk in the breeze, "until someone with 4 legs showed me where the light lives." Bruno pressed his head against her shoulder. The wind picked up, rustling the branches above. The wind chime sang once more high, sweet, wild. And for the first time in a long time, the pines danced again. They said she wouldn't make it, that her heart had run out of time. But then came a dog who had once saved her father, and who, without a single word, would help save her too. This wasn't just a story about survival. It was about memory, forgiveness, and the invisible threads that tie us together across years, pain, and even silence. The final wind chime in the pine tree wasn't just for Emily, it was a reminder to all of us that love, when given freely, never vanishes. It echoes. As Maya Angelou wrote, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel." And maybe, just maybe, that's what Bruno did best. If this story moved you, even just a little, please don't let it end here. Subscribe to Vale Marks. Leave a comment. Tell me what stayed with you. Your voice, your presence, it means more than you know. With every subscriber, this channel grows stronger. And with your support, I can keep creating stories that heal, that matter, that last. Because some stories, like the sound of wind through pines, deserve to be remembered forever. Thank you for being part of this one.